Welcome to the Soul of History channel. Margaret Bell's hands trembled as she held the official envelope, its crisp white paper bearing the seal of Manchester Family Court. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window of their modest flat, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like her scattered thoughts. She had been preparing Emily's breakfast when the postman knocked, and now the toast lay forgotten, growing cold on the counter. 7-year-old Emily sat at the small wooden table, her dark eyes watching her mother with the intuitive awareness that seemed to define her young life. Her school uniform was pressed and ready, her books neatly stacked beside her school bag. Everything about Emily spoke of careful attention, of a mother who ensured her daughter lacked nothing that love and dedication could provide. "Mummy?" Emily's voice was soft, concerned. "Is everything all right?" Margaret forced a smile, though her heart was racing. The letter bore the name she had hoped never to see again. Charles Whitmore versus Margaret Bell. Petition for change of custody. The words blurred before her eyes as she read the legal jargon that threatened to tear her world apart. Charles Whitmore, the man who had walked out when Emily was barely 2 years old, claiming that fatherhood wasn't what he had expected. The man who had never sent a birthday card, never asked about school plays or scraped knees, never contributed a penny to Emily's upbringing. Now, 5 years later, he wanted custody of the daughter he had abandoned. "Just some boring grown-up paperwork, sweetheart," Margaret managed, tucking the letter into her apron pocket. But Emily's perceptive gaze lingered, and Margaret knew her daughter had sensed the shift in the morning's atmosphere. The walk to Oakwood Primary School felt different that day. Margaret found herself studying Emily's profile as they made their way down the familiar streets. Her daughter's intelligence had always been remarkable. She read voraciously, asked questions that made adults pause, and possessed an innate sense of fairness that sometimes startled Margaret with its clarity. Teachers consistently praised Emily's exceptional abilities, but Margaret had never considered how those gifts might one day be needed for something far more serious than academic achievement. Miss Catherine Lewis greeted them at the school gate, her warm smile immediately noting Margaret's distraction. Catherine had been Emily's teacher for 2 years now, and in that time she had become more than an educator. She was a mentor who recognized and nurtured Emily's extraordinary potential. "Good morning, Mrs. Bell, Emily," Catherine said, her voice carrying the gentle authority that made her beloved by students and parents alike. She was a woman in her early 40s, with prematurely silver hair that she wore pulled back in a practical bun, and kind eyes that missed very little. Emily hugged her mother goodbye and skipped toward the classroom. But Catherine lingered for a moment. "Is everything all right, Margaret? You seem troubled." Margaret hesitated. Catherine Lewis had always been approachable, but this felt too personal, too frightening to share. "Just one of those mornings," she replied with false brightness. "Work pressures, you know." Catherine nodded, though her expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. As Margaret walked away, she felt the weight of the letter in her pocket like a stone. She had 3 weeks to respond to the petition, 3 weeks to figure out how a single mother who worked as a seamstress could afford to fight a man who, according to the letter, was now employed as a successful financial consultant. The sewing machine in Margaret's small home workshop hummed steadily throughout the day as she worked on alterations for Mrs. Henderson's daughter's wedding dress. Usually the rhythmic sound soothed her, but today it provided a soundtrack to her racing thoughts. Charles had left them with nothing but debt and broken promises. She had rebuilt their lives stitch by careful stitch, taking in alterations and custom work, slowly building a modest but steady clientele. When Emily returned from school that afternoon, she found her mother still at the sewing machine, but the fabric lay untouched while Margaret stared out the window. Emily set down her school bag and climbed onto the chair beside her mother's workspace. "Miss Lewis asked me if everything was okay at home today," Emily said matter-of-factly. "I told her that sometimes grown-ups worry about things that children don't understand, but that you always figure out solutions." Margaret's throat tightened. How had she raised such a wise little soul? And what did Miss Lewis say to that? She said that sometimes children understand more than grown-ups think they do, and that if I ever needed to talk about anything, her door was always open. Emily paused, studying her mother's face. "Mummy, what's in the letter that made you sad?" Margaret looked at her daughter, really looked at her. Emily's brown eyes held intelligence beyond her years, but also trust, complete faith that whatever was wrong, her mother would make it right. Margaret knew she couldn't hide this forever. Emily would learn about the custody battle eventually, and it would be better coming from her. "It's from your father," Margaret said quietly. "He wants you to come live with him." Emily's expression didn't change immediately. She processed this information with the same careful consideration she applied to difficult math problems at school. Finally, she asked, "Why now? He never wanted to live with me before." The question pierced straight to the heart of Margaret's own suspicions, but she couldn't voice them to a 7-year-old. Instead, she pulled Emily into her arms, holding her close, breathing in the scent of her daughter's hair and feeling the steady beat of her heart. "I don't know, sweetheart," she whispered, "but I promise you this, we'll figure it out together." Catherine Lewis stood in her small apartment above the corner bookshop, surrounded by boxes she hadn't unpacked in 3 years of living there. Not because she was planning to move, but because some boxes contained a past she wasn't sure she wanted to fully embrace again. Tonight, however, Emily Bell's troubled face had stirred something in her that made her finally open the one marked law books in her careful handwriting. The leather-bound volumes emerged like old friends: constitutional law, family law, criminal procedure. Each spine bore the marks of intensive study, highlighted passages, bookmarked pages, margin notes in her younger self's enthusiastic handwriting. Catherine ran her fingers over children's rights and family court procedures, remembering the idealistic 22-year-old who had believed she could change the world one case at a time. She had been brilliant at law school, finishing in the top 5% of her class at Cambridge. Job offers from prestigious London firms had poured in, each promising fast tracks to partnership and 6-figure salaries. But Catherine had chosen differently. She had wanted to practice family law, to advocate for children and families who couldn't afford the best representation. She had believed, with the fervor of youth, that justice should be accessible to everyone. The disillusionment had come gradually. 3 years in a small family law practice had shown her the harsh realities of the system. Wealthy clients received thorough representation, while legal aid cases were rushed through with minimal attention. She watched good parents lose their children to those with better lawyers, saw financial resources matter more than actual parenting ability. The final straw had come during a custody case involving a 7-year-old girl whose father was seeking custody primarily to avoid paying child support to his ex-wife. Catherine had recognized the pattern, the father's sudden interest coinciding with his discovery of his daughter's trust fund from her grandmother. But without sufficient resources to investigate properly, without time to build a comprehensive case, Catherine had watched the court award custody to a man whose interest in his daughter was entirely financial. The mother, a struggling nurse, had been deemed less able to provide opportunities, despite being the parent who had raised the child with love and dedication. That night, Catherine had made a decision that would reshape her entire life. She resigned from the law firm and enrolled in a teaching certification program. If she couldn't fix the system from within, she would dedicate herself to nurturing young minds, helping children develop the critical thinking and confidence they would need to navigate an imperfect world. Teaching had brought her unexpected joy. Each September, she faced a classroom full of possibilities, young minds ready to grow and explore. She had never regretted her decision, but she had also never stopped keeping up with changes in family law, never disposed of her law books, never let her legal knowledge become completely dormant. Now, As she sat cross-legged on her living room floor, surrounded by legal texts, Catherine felt a familiar stirring. Emily Bell was special, not just academically gifted, but possessed of an innate sense of justice and an ability to see through to the heart of complex issues. In 2 years of teaching her, Catherine had watched Emily defend classmates against bullies, organize charity drives for local families in need, and ask questions about fairness that made other children think more deeply about their actions. Catherine opened her laptop and began researching Charles Whitmore. Social media made such investigations easier than they had been in her practicing days. She found him quickly, a financial consultant with a lifestyle that spoke of recent prosperity. His LinkedIn profile showed a job change 6 months ago to a much higher-paying position. His Facebook photos showed expensive restaurants, a new car, a lifestyle that seemed suddenly affluent. But it was the timeline that made Catherine's pulse quicken. Charles's improved circumstances appeared to coincide almost exactly with something else: the death of Margaret's father, Emily's grandfather, 3 months ago. Catherine remembered Margaret taking a few days off work for the funeral, remembered Emily being unusually quiet for a week afterward. Catherine reached for her phone and called her former colleague, Sarah Martinez, who still practiced family law in Manchester. After catching up briefly, Catherine asked the question that had been forming in her mind. Sarah, hypothetically, if a child inherited money, but the custodial parent controlled it until the child reached majority, what would happen if custody changed? The new custodial parent would control the inheritance, Sarah replied without hesitation. Why? Are you thinking of coming back to practice? Catherine deflected the question, but her suspicions were crystallizing. She spent the next hour researching inheritance law, refreshing her memory on the specifics of trust administration and custodial control of minors' assets. By the time she closed her laptop, Catherine had a clear picture of what was likely happening. Charles Whitmore had discovered that his daughter had inherited money from her grandfather, and he wanted control of it. The timing was too coincidental to ignore, but having suspicions and proving them in court were two different things. Margaret would need legal representation, and good family lawyers were expensive. Catherine thought of the young woman who worked tirelessly to provide for her daughter, who had rebuilt her life from nothing after being abandoned by the man now trying to take Emily away. Catherine made a decision that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. She walked to her desk and pulled out a notebook, the same type she had used to plan legal strategies 15 years ago. At the top of the first page, she wrote, "Emily Bell Custody Case, Strategy and Research." She wasn't licensed to practice law anymore, but there was nothing preventing her from helping Margaret understand her options, from ensuring that Emily's voice would be heard in this process. Catherine had learned during her years in the classroom that sometimes the most powerful advocacy came not from lawyers in suits, but from those who truly understood what was at stake. The next morning, Catherine arrived at school early and found Emily already in the classroom, reading quietly at her desk. The little girl looked up with a tentative smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good morning, Miss Lewis." "Good morning, Emily. How are you feeling today?" Emily considered the question with her characteristic seriousness. "Confused," she said finally, "and worried about my mummy." Catherine knelt beside Emily's desk, bringing herself to the child's eye level. "Would you like to talk about it? Sometimes when we're confused about things, it helps to ask questions and learn more." Emily's eyes brightened slightly. "Mummy says my father wants me to live with him, but I don't understand why. He never wanted to live with me before. Is it normal for people to change their minds about important things like that?" Catherine felt her heart clench at the matter-of-fact way Emily asked the question that cut to the core of the issue. "Sometimes people do change their minds, Emily, but you're right to notice that it's unusual for someone to suddenly want something they never wanted before. What do you think might make someone change their mind like that?" Emily tilted her head, thinking. Well, either they realized they made a mistake before, or something changed that made them want it now for a different reason. Catherine nodded, marveling again at Emily's insight. That's very good thinking. Both of those things are possible. Miss Lewis, Emily said quietly, if someone wanted something for the wrong reasons, is there a way to find out? And if you found out, could you tell a judge? Catherine felt a chill run down her spine. Emily's question suggested an understanding that went beyond her years, an intuitive grasp of the situation that was both impressive and heartbreaking. Yes, Emily, Catherine said carefully. There are ways to find out people's real reasons for doing things. And yes, judges need to know the truth so they can make good decisions. Emily nodded solemnly. Then maybe someone should find out the truth about my father. As Catherine watched Emily return to her reading, she knew that her decision the night before had been the right one. This little girl deserved someone who would fight for her, someone who would ensure that the truth came to light. Catherine Lewis might not be practicing law anymore, but she was about to become an advocate in the most important case of her career. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Catherine's empty classroom as she arranged chairs around her desk. She had asked Margaret to bring Emily after school for what she had described as additional tutoring, but Catherine's real intention was far more complex. The law books she had retrieved from storage lay open on her desk, their familiar weight and smell transporting her back to her days as a practicing attorney. Margaret arrived promptly at 4 o'clock, Emily's small hand clasped firmly in hers. The worry lines around Margaret's eyes had deepened over the past week, and Catherine noticed how Emily seemed to be watching her mother with increased vigilance, as if ready to provide comfort at a moment's notice. "Thank you for offering to help Emily with her studies," Margaret said, settling into one of the small chairs. "Though I should mention, her grades are already excellent." Catherine smiled gently. "Margaret, I asked you both here because I want to help with something much more important than regular schoolwork. I know about the custody petition." Margaret's face went pale. "How did you—" "Emily mentioned it yesterday, and I've done some research since then." Angie, Catherine's voice was calm but serious. "Margaret, I used to be a lawyer. I specialized in family law before I became a teacher." The silence that followed was heavy with surprise and possibility. Emily's eyes moved between the two women, her quick mind already processing this new information and its implications. "I don't understand," Margaret said finally. "If you were a lawyer, why are you teaching?" Catherine had anticipated this question, but answering it still required a moment of vulnerability. "I left the law because I became frustrated with how the system worked. Too often I saw good parents lose their children to those who simply had more money for better lawyers. But Emily's situation has made me realize that perhaps my legal knowledge could be put to better use in a different way." Now she turned to Emily, who was listening with intense concentration. "Emily, do you know what laws are for?" Emily nodded immediately. "To keep people safe and make sure things are fair." "Exactly. And there are special laws that are just about children and families. Would you like to learn about some of them?" Emily's eyes lit up with the same enthusiasm she showed for any new learning opportunity. "Yes, please." Catherine opened the family law textbook and pointed to a highlighted section. "This is called the Children Act. It says that in any decision about where a child should live, the most important thing is what's best for the child. Not what's best for the parents, not what's easiest for the court, but what's best for the child." "That makes sense," Emily said, leaning forward to examine the page. "But how do they figure out what's best?" "Excellent question. They look at lots of different things." Catherine pulled out a notebook and began writing a list. "They consider who has been taking care of the child, who the child feels safe with, who provides for the child's needs, and what the child wants, if the child is old enough to express their wishes clearly." Margaret shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Catherine, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but Emily is only 7. Surely they wouldn't ask her to choose between her parents. Actually, Catherine said carefully, children Emily's age can express their wishes to the court, though the judge will consider many other factors as well. But here's something important, Emily. If you ever had to talk to a judge, you would have the right to explain not just what you want, but why you want it. Emily absorbed this information with her characteristic seriousness. So, if I understood why I wanted to stay with Mummy and could explain it properly, that would matter. It could matter very much, Catherine confirmed, but understanding the reasons means understanding what makes a good home for a child. What do you think those things might be? Emily considered the question carefully. Love, she said immediately, but not just saying you love someone. Actually showing it by taking care of them and making sure they're happy and safe. Catherine felt a familiar thrill at Emily's insight. What else? Making sure they learn things and grow up to be good people, and being there when they need you, not just when it's convenient. Emily paused, then added quietly, and maybe it's not about having the most money, but about using whatever you have to make the child's life better. Margaret's eyes filled with tears at her daughter's words, but Catherine pressed on, sensing that Emily was beginning to grasp concepts that many adults struggled with. Those are all very important points, Emily. Now imagine you were trying to explain to a judge why your current home is good for you. What evidence would you give? Emily thought for a long moment. I would tell them about how Mummy reads to me every night, even when she's tired from working. And how she helps me with my homework and comes to all my school events, and how when I was sick last year, she stayed home from work to take care of me even though she didn't get paid for those days. Catherine began writing down Emily's responses. Those are all examples of what lawyers call evidence. They're facts that support your point. Can you think of any other evidence? Well, Emily said slowly, I've been happy living with Mummy. I do well at school. I have friends. I'm healthy. Isn't that evidence that it's a good home for me? Catherine smiled broadly. That's exactly right. Your well-being and development are very strong evidence. Now, can you think of any evidence that might support your father's case? This question was harder, and Emily frowned in concentration. He might have more money now, so he could buy me things or pay for activities. Good thinking. What else? Maybe he has a bigger house or lives in a neighborhood with better schools. Emily paused, then added with startling perceptiveness, but I'm not sure those things would make me happier or safer if he doesn't actually care about me as a person. Catherine exchanged a glance with Margaret, both women struck by Emily's ability to distinguish between material advantages and genuine care. Emily, Catherine said gently, that's a very mature observation. Now I want to ask you something important. If you had to talk to a judge about this situation, how would you feel about that? Emily straightened in her chair. Scared, she admitted. But also, I think I would want to make sure the judge understood the truth about what's been good for me and what hasn't. And what do you see as the truth? Emily's voice grew stronger. The truth is that Mummy has taken care of me every day since I was born. She's worked hard to make sure I had everything I needed. She's taught me to be kind and honest and to work hard. My father left us, and he's never been part of my life. If he wants me now, it's not because he's suddenly learned how to be a good father. Catherine felt a chill at Emily's words. The child had intuitively grasped what Catherine suspected about Charles's motivations. But she also demonstrated a level of articulation that was remarkable for her age. Emily, Catherine said, would you be interested in learning more about how courts work and what rights children have? Not because we expect you to go to court, but because understanding these things might help you feel less scared about what's happening. Emily nodded eagerly. Yes, I want to understand everything. Margaret finally spoke up, her voice thick with emotion. Catherine, what you're suggesting, it feels like you're preparing her to testify. Catherine turned to face Margaret directly. I'm preparing her to understand her situation and her rights. Margaret, from what I've researched about your ex-husband, I believe his interest in Emily is primarily financial. But suspecting that and proving it are different things. If this case goes to court, Emily's voice could be crucial, not just in saying what she wants, but in explaining why. But she's so young. She's young, but she's also exceptionally intelligent and articulate. More importantly, she's the person who would be most affected by the court's decision. She deserves to understand what's happening and to have some agency in the process. Catherine knelt down to Emily's level. Emily, learning about these things might be difficult sometimes. Are you sure you want to continue? Emily looked at her mother, then back at Catherine. If it helps protect Mummy and me, then yes. I want to learn everything I need to know. As they packed up the law books that afternoon, Catherine felt a familiar sense of purpose that she hadn't experienced since her days in practice. But this time, it was different. This time, she wasn't just representing a client. She was nurturing a young advocate who was fighting for her own future. The little girl walking out of the classroom that day was already transforming, though none of them yet realized how far that transformation would go. 3 weeks into their afternoon sessions, Emily's understanding of family law had progressed far beyond what Catherine had thought possible for a 7-year-old. The child sat at the small classroom table, surrounded by simplified legal documents and colorful charts that Catherine had created to make complex concepts accessible. Emily's notebook, once empty, now contained pages of careful handwriting documenting everything from the basic principles of custody law to her own timeline of significant events in her life. Tell me about the welfare checklist again, Emily, Catherine prompted, testing the child's retention of crucial legal concepts. Emily referred to her notes, though Catherine suspected she could recite the information from memory. The welfare checklist is what judges use to decide what's best for a child. They look at the child's physical, emotional, and educational needs. They consider how capable each parent is of meeting those needs. They look at any harm the child might suffer, and they consider the child's age and understanding of the situation. Excellent. And why is this important for your case? Emily's expression grew thoughtful. Because my father's lawyers will probably argue that he can provide better for my physical and educational needs because he has more money now. But I can show that Mummy has always met all my needs and that I haven't suffered any harm living with her. Actually, I've thrived. Catherine marveled at Emily's use of legal terminology. The child had absorbed not just the concepts, but the language of law, adapting it to her own situation with remarkable clarity. Margaret entered the classroom carrying tea and biscuits, a ritual they had established to make these sessions feel less formal and intimidating. She had initially been hesitant about Catherine's approach, worried that they were placing too much burden on Emily's young shoulders. But as she watched her daughter's confidence grow and her understanding deepen, Margaret had become convinced that knowledge was better than ignorance, preparation better than helplessness. How did your meeting with the solicitor go today? Catherine asked Margaret as she settled into a chair beside them. Margaret's expression tightened. David Morrison seems competent, but he's very young and obviously overwhelmed by Charles's legal team. He advised me to consider settling out of court, maybe agreeing to shared custody. Emily looked up sharply. But Mummy, that doesn't address the real issue. If the court doesn't examine his motivations properly, he might just wait and petition for full custody later when he has a stronger financial position. Catherine felt a surge of pride at Emily's strategic thinking. What do you mean, Emily? Well, if he's really interested in the inheritance from Grandpa, shared custody doesn't give him full control of it. But if he can establish a pattern of being my parent through shared custody, he could argue later that I should live with him full time because I've gotten used to spending time with him. Margaret stared at her daughter in amazement. "Emily, how did you figure that out?" Emily shrugged, as if the logic were obvious. "It's what I would do if I were trying to get something I wasn't entitled to. Start small and build up to what I really wanted." Catherine leaned back in her chair, studying Emily with professional admiration. "Emily, you've just described a common legal strategy called incremental positioning. Many custody cases follow exactly that pattern." "So, what can we do about it?" Emily asked, her voice taking on the determined tone that had become familiar during their sessions. Catherine pulled out a folder she had been preparing. "We build a comprehensive case that addresses not just the immediate custody question, but the underlying issues. Emily, I want to ask you something important. How would you feel about writing a letter to the judge?" Emily straightened immediately. "What kind of letter?" "A letter that explains your situation from your perspective. Not just what you want, but why you want it, with specific examples and evidence. Something that shows the judge not just what you think, but how clearly you can think." Margaret looked concerned. "Catherine, is that appropriate? She's still a child. Children have the right to have their voices heard in custody proceedings," Catherine replied firmly. "The question isn't whether Emily should have a voice, but how that voice can be most effectively presented. Emily has insights about her own situation that no adult can provide." Emily was already reaching for her notebook. "What should I include?" Catherine had been preparing for this moment. "Start with your daily life. Describe a typical day, from when you wake up to when you go to sleep. Show the judge what your relationship with your mother actually looks like in practical terms." Emily began writing immediately, her hand moving steadily across the page. As Catherine watched, she realized that Emily was doing more than just describing her routine. She was building a narrative that demonstrated the depth and consistency of her relationship with Margaret. "Listen to this," Emily said after 20 minutes of concentrated writing. She read aloud, "Every morning Mummy wakes me up by sitting on my bed and singing softly until I'm ready to get up. She never just shouts from downstairs or turns on bright lights because she knows I wake up better with gentle sounds. She makes my breakfast while I get dressed, and she always cuts my toast into triangles because she remembers that I told her once that triangles taste better than squares." Catherine felt her throat tighten at the simple but profound details Emily was capturing. "That's beautiful, Emily. Keep going." Emily continued reading. "After school, Mummy asks me about my day while we have a snack together. She doesn't just ask if I had a good day. She asks specific questions about what I learned, who I played with, and if anything worried me. When I tell her about problems with friends or schoolwork, she helps me think through solutions instead of just telling me what to do." Margaret wiped tears from her eyes as she listened to her daughter's precise documentation of their relationship. These weren't grand gestures or expensive gifts. They were the small, daily acts of love that had shaped Emily's entire world. "Emily," Catherine said gently, "now I want you to think about something more difficult. Can you describe what you remember about your father?" Emily's expression grew serious. "I don't remember him living with us, but Mummy has told me some things, and I've figured out others." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I know he left when I was 2, because he said being a father was too hard. I know he never sent birthday cards or Christmas presents. I know he never called to check if I was okay when I had chicken pox, or when I broke my arm falling off my bike." Catherine nodded encouragingly. "Can you write about how that felt?" Emily thought for a moment, then began writing again. When she finished, she read, "For most of my life, I thought it was normal to have just a mummy. I was happy, and I didn't feel like anything was missing because Mummy made sure I had everything I needed. But now that my father wants me to live with him, I've been thinking about why he changed his mind. The timing seems strange, because it happened right after Grandpa died and left me some money." Catherine exchanged a glance with Margaret. Emily had made the connection on her own, without any prompting. "Emily," Catherine said carefully, That's a very astute observation. But if you were going to present this to a judge, you would need to be even more specific. Can you think of evidence that supports your suspicion? Emily nodded confidently. I can research when he got his new job and compare it to when he filed for custody. I can document that he never showed any interest in me before the inheritance. And I can ask questions about his lifestyle changes and whether they coincide with learning about Grandpa's will. Catherine felt a chill of professional recognition. Emily was thinking like a lawyer, building a case based on evidence and logical reasoning. But she was also still a 7-year-old child who shouldn't have to prove her worth to her own father. Emily, Catherine said softly, you're doing remarkable work. But I want you to remember something important. You don't have to prove that you deserve love. You don't have to justify your right to stay with the parent who has always cared for you. What we're doing is making sure the judge has all the information needed to make a good decision. Emily nodded solemnly. I understand, Miss Lewis, but I also understand that sometimes the right thing doesn't happen unless someone fights for it. And if I don't fight for myself and Mummy, who will? The question hung in the air, powerful in its simplicity. Catherine realized that Emily had grasped something that many adults struggled with. That justice wasn't automatic, that truth didn't always speak for itself, and that sometimes the most vulnerable people had to become their own strongest advocates. As they packed up their materials that afternoon, Catherine felt a mixture of pride and trepidation. Emily was becoming exactly what Catherine had hoped, an articulate, informed advocate for her own best interests. But Catherine also worried about the burden they were placing on such young shoulders. That evening, as Catherine reviewed Emily's letter, she realized that the child had accomplished something remarkable. She had presented her case not as a plea for sympathy, but as a logical argument supported by evidence and delivered with remarkable clarity. Emily Bell was becoming a formidable voice for her own future. The question was whether the legal system was ready to listen to such a young advocate and whether a judge would recognize the extraordinary wisdom contained in such a small package. The law office of Hartwell, Stratton and Associates occupied 3 floors of a glass tower in Manchester's business district, its marble lobby and leather furniture designed to intimidate as much as impress. Charles Whitmore sat in the senior partner's office, his confidence evident in the way he leaned back in the expensive chair, discussing his daughter as if she were a business acquisition rather than a human being. The mother's solicitor is inexperienced, James Hartwell was saying, sliding a folder across his mahogany desk. David Morrison, fresh from university, clearly in over his head. This should be straightforward. Charles nodded, though his expression carried an edge of impatience. I want this resolved quickly. The longer it drags on, the more opportunity there is for complications. What sort of complications? Hartwell's associate, Patricia Stratton, looked up from her notes. She was younger than Hartwell, but equally polished, her sharp suit and severe hairstyle projecting competence and ruthlessness in equal measure. Charles hesitated, then decided that full disclosure was necessary. The child is unusual, very bright, very articulate. If this goes to trial and she's allowed to speak, she might say things that could be problematic. Hartwell frowned. She's 7 years old, Charles. How problematic could a child's testimony be? You don't know Emily, Charles replied grimly. She asks uncomfortable questions and remembers everything. The less opportunity she has to speak in court, the better. Stratton made a note on her legal pad. We'll argue that children her age lack the emotional maturity to understand the complexities of custody arrangements. We'll emphasize that what seems like intelligence might actually be coaching from the mother or others. Charles felt a flicker of unease at this strategy, but pushed the feeling aside. The inheritance from Margaret's father was substantial, nearly $200,000 that Emily would gain access to at 18, but which the custodial parent could manage and, in practice, use for the child's benefit until then. That money could solve all of Charles's financial problems and provide the security he had never been able to achieve on his own. "Tell me about the mother's situation," Hartwell said, opening another folder. "Margaret Bell, seamstress, works from home?" "She barely scrapes by," Charles replied, his voice taking on the tone he had practiced for court. "Lives in a small flat, no savings to speak of, no prospects for advancement. She's a good woman, I suppose, but Emily deserves better opportunities than what Margaret can provide." "Excellent. We'll argue that while Ms. Bell has provided adequate care in the past, Mr. Whitmore's improved circumstances allow him to offer educational and social advantages that are in Emily's best interests." Stratton was taking rapid notes. "Private schools, tutoring, extracurricular activities, cultural experiences, all things that require financial resources Ms. Bell simply doesn't have." Hartwell leaned forward. "Charles, I need you to be completely honest with me. Is there anything in your past relationship with Ms. Bell or Emily that could be used against us?" Charles had been dreading this question. "I left when Emily was young. Margaret and I weren't compatible, and I felt I wasn't ready for the responsibilities of fatherhood." "How young?" Stratton's pen was poised over her notepad. 2. The silence in the room was heavy. Finally, Hartwell spoke. "And you've had regular contact with Emily since then?" "Not regular, no. I've been working to establish my career, and I felt it was better to wait until I could provide properly for her." Stratton and Hartwell exchanged glances. This was problematic, but not insurmountable. "So you've had no contact with Emily for 5 years?" Stratton pressed. "Essentially, yes, but that demonstrates responsibility, not neglect. I recognized that I wasn't in a position to be the father she deserved, so I waited until I could offer her a proper life." Hartwell nodded slowly. "We can work with that. We'll frame it as mature decision-making and long-term planning for Emily's benefit. The narrative will be that you've spent 5 years building a stable foundation, specifically so you could provide for your daughter." "What about the timing?" Stratton asked. "Ms. Bell's father died 3 months ago, and you filed for custody 2 weeks later. The correlation might raise questions." Charles felt heat rise in his face. "I learned about Margaret's father's death through mutual acquaintances. It made me think about mortality, about lost time, about the importance of family. The timing isn't suspicious. It's natural." Hartwell made a note. "Good. We'll emphasize the emotional impact of learning about the grandfather's death, how it catalyzed your realization that you needed to be part of Emily's life." "Is there anything else we should know?" Stratton asked. "Any other factors that might complicate the case?" Charles hesitated. He had heard through the same acquaintances who had informed him of the inheritance that Emily was receiving special attention at school, that her teacher was spending extra time with her, but he didn't fully understand what that meant, and he wasn't sure it was relevant. "The child's teacher seems unusually involved," he said finally. "Someone named Catherine Lewis. She's apparently been giving Emily additional tutoring." Stratton made another note. "We'll look into that. If there's any inappropriate coaching or preparation happening, we can use it to argue that Emily's statements have been influenced by adults with their own agenda." Hartwell stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "Charles, I want you to understand something clearly. Family court judges are generally sympathetic to fathers who are trying to reconnect with their children, especially when those fathers can demonstrate improved circumstances and genuine commitment. We have a strong case." "What about Emily's preferences?" Charles asked. "If she says she wants to stay with her mother?" "Children her age often resist change," Stratton replied smoothly. "It's natural for her to want to stay in familiar surroundings with the only parent she's known. But judges understand that children can't always see what's best for their long-term future. That's why we have adults making these decisions." As Charles left the law office, he felt a mixture of confidence and unease. The lawyers seemed certain they could win, but something about their dismissive attitude toward Emily's intelligence bothered him. He had only spent a few hours with his daughter in recent years, but even in those brief encounters, he had been struck by her perceptiveness and articulation. Meanwhile, across town, Margaret was meeting with David Morrison in his much smaller office above a kebab shop. The contrast couldn't have been starker. Morrison's office was cramped and cluttered, his furniture mismatched, his resources clearly limited. "I'll be honest with you, Margaret," Morrison was saying, his youthful face creased with worry. "Charles's legal team is formidable. They're going to argue that he can provide opportunities you can't, and they're going to make it sound convincing." Margaret felt her heart sink. "What can we do?" Morrison shuffled through his papers, looking overwhelmed. "We can emphasize the stability you've provided, the strong bond you have with Emily, the fact that disrupting her current living situation could be harmful. But if Charles can demonstrate significant financial advantages—" "It's not about the money," Margaret said firmly. "It's about love and care and being there every day. I understand that, and you understand that. But courts also consider practical factors. Private education, tutoring, extracurricular activities, these things matter to judges." Margaret thought about Catherine's evening sessions with Emily, about the remarkable growth she had witnessed in her daughter's confidence and understanding. Emily has been receiving additional education. Her teacher, Miss Lewis, has been helping her understand the situation. Morrison looked up with interest. "What kind of help?" Margaret hesitated, uncertain how to explain Catherine's unique approach. "Miss Lewis used to be a lawyer. She's been teaching Emily about children's rights and family law, helping her understand what's happening." Morrison's expression grew concerned. "Margaret, that could be seen as coaching if it appears that Emily's testimony has been rehearsed or influenced by adults." "It's not coaching," Margaret said quickly. "It's education. Emily is learning to think for herself, to understand her own situation better. Even so, we need to be careful. Charles's lawyers will look for any opportunity to discredit Emily's voice in this process." As Margaret walked home that evening, she felt the weight of the challenge ahead. Charles had money, influential lawyers, and a system that seemed designed to favor financial resources over emotional bonds. But he also had weaknesses. His 5-year absence, his sudden interest coinciding with the inheritance, his fundamental lack of understanding of who Emily really was. That night, as Margaret tucked Emily into bed, her daughter looked up with serious eyes. "Mummy, Miss Lewis explained to me today that my father's lawyers will probably try to make it seem like I don't understand what's best for me because I'm only 7. Margaret smoothed Emily's hair. "What do you think about that?" Emily considered the question carefully. "I think they're partly right. I don't understand everything about being an adult or managing money or some of those complicated things. But I do understand love, and I understand taking care of someone, and I understand keeping promises, and those are the most important things for a parent, aren't they?" Margaret felt tears prick her eyes at her daughter's wisdom. "Yes, sweetheart, those are the most important things. Then I think," Emily said with quiet determination, "that when the time comes, I need to show them that even though I'm 7, I understand the things that matter most." As Margaret turned off the light, she realized that while Charles had lawyers and money, Emily had something potentially more powerful: truth, clarity, and a voice that, young as it was, carried the weight of lived experience and genuine understanding. The question was whether the court would recognize the value of that voice, or whether it would be dismissed as the words of a child too young to know her own mind. The Manchester family court building stood imposing against the grey October sky, its Victorian architecture lending an air of formality and tradition to the proceedings within. Emily walked beside her mother and David Morrison, her small hand clasped tightly in Margaret's, her other hand carrying a carefully organized folder containing the work she had done with Catherine over the past 2 months. Emily wore her best dress, a navy blue outfit that Margaret had sewn herself, with small pearl buttons that caught the morning light. Her hair was braided neatly, and she carried herself with a composure that seemed remarkable for a 7-year-old about to face one of the most important days of her young life. Catherine Lewis walked slightly behind them, officially present as a character witness, but privately serving as Emily's mentor and emotional support. She had spent the previous evening reviewing Emily's preparation one final time, ensuring that the child understood both the process she was about to enter and her own rights within it. "Remember," Catherine had told Emily the night before, "you don't have to prove you're perfect or that you never make mistakes. You just have to be honest about your experiences and your feelings. The judge wants to understand your situation, not test you." Now, as they entered the courthouse, Emily felt a mixture of nervousness and determination. She had prepared thoroughly for this moment, but she also understood that preparation could only take her so far. The rest would depend on her ability to communicate clearly and truthfully about her own life. The courtroom itself was smaller than Emily had expected, more like a conference room than the grand chamber she had imagined. Judge Sarah Pemberton sat behind a modest desk, rather than an elevated bench, her grey hair pulled back in a simple bun, her expression serious, but not unkind. She was known in the Manchester legal community as a fair judge who took children's welfare seriously, though she was also practical and not easily swayed by emotional appeals. Charles Whitmore sat with his legal team at one table, looking confident in an expensive suit that spoke of his improved circumstances. Emily studied her father for a moment, noting how different he looked from the few photographs Margaret had kept from their brief marriage. He was heavier now, his face softer, his manner more polished. When their eyes met across the courtroom, he offered a smile that Emily found difficult to interpret. At the other table, Margaret sat with David Morrison, who looked young and nervous compared to the polished confidence of Hartwell, Stratton and Associates. Emily took her seat beside her mother, her folder placed neatly on the table before her. Judge Pemberton called the court to order and began with the standard preliminaries, explaining the nature of the proceedings and the court's obligation to determine what arrangement would serve Emily's best interests. Emily listened carefully, noting how the judge's language was precise and formal, but not incomprehensible. James Hartwell rose to present Charles's case, his voice smooth and practiced. "Your Honor, this case represents a father's attempt to reconnect with his daughter after a period of necessary but painful separation. Mr. Whitmore recognizes that his decision to step back from Emily's life when she was very young was difficult, but it was made out of genuine concern for his ability to provide for her at that time." Emily felt a flicker of anger at this characterization, but Catherine had taught her to listen carefully to opposing arguments and to note specific claims that could be addressed with evidence. Hartwell continued, "Mr. Whitmore has spent the past 5 years building a stable career and secure financial foundation, specifically so that he could offer Emily the opportunities she deserves. He now earns a substantial salary as a senior financial consultant, owns a 4-bedroom home in an excellent school district, and is prepared to provide private education, tutoring, and enrichment activities that Ms. Bell, despite her best efforts, simply cannot afford." The presentation continued for 30 minutes, painting a picture of Charles as a responsible father who had made difficult sacrifices in order to eventually provide better for his daughter. Hartwell presented evidence of Charles's income, his housing situation, and his ability to pay for educational advantages. "Most importantly," Hartwell concluded, "Mr. Whitmore offers Emily stability and opportunities for advancement that will serve her throughout her life. While we acknowledge Miss Bell's dedication as a mother, dedication alone cannot substitute for the practical advantages that Mr. Whitmore can provide." When Hartwell sat down, David Morrison rose to present Margaret's case. Despite his youth and obvious nervousness, he spoke with genuine conviction about Margaret's role in Emily's life. "Your Honor, Emily Bell has never known a day without her mother's care. Miss Bell has not only provided for all of Emily's physical and emotional needs, but she has raised a remarkable child who excels academically, socially, and morally. The bond between mother and daughter is evident to anyone who observes them together." Morrison presented evidence of Emily's academic achievements, her excellent health, her strong friendships, and her emotional stability. He called Catherine Lewis as a character witness, and Catherine spoke eloquently about Emily's exceptional development and the clear evidence of excellent parenting in every aspect of the child's life. "Miss Bell may not have the financial resources of Mr. Whitmore," Morrison continued, "but she has provided something far more valuable, consistent, loving, daily care that has allowed Emily to flourish. To disrupt this relationship now, particularly given Mr. Whitmore's 5-year absence from Emily's life, would serve no one's interests except perhaps Mr. Whitmore's own." Emily noticed how Morrison's presentation, while heartfelt, lacked the polished confidence of Hartwell's argument. She also noticed that Morrison had not directly addressed the question of Charles's motivations for seeking custody now, after years of absence. Judge Pemberton listened carefully to both presentations, asking occasional questions about practical matters, schooling arrangements, living situations, Emily's current routine. Emily found herself mentally cataloguing the questions, recognizing patterns in what the judge seemed to consider important. "I'd like to speak with Emily privately," Judge Pemberton announced as the formal presentations concluded. "We'll take a 15-minute recess, after which I'll meet with Emily in my chambers." Emily felt her heart rate increase, but also felt a surge of anticipation. This was the moment she had been preparing for, the opportunity to speak for herself about her own life and future. Catherine squeezed Emily's hand gently. "Remember everything we've talked about. Be yourself, tell the truth, and trust that your voice matters." Margaret leaned down to whisper, "I'm proud of you no matter what happens, sweetheart." Emily nodded, straightening her shoulders and taking a deep breath. She had spent months preparing for this conversation, learning about law and rights and evidence. But more than that, she had spent 7 years living the experiences she was about to describe. She was ready to speak for herself, to explain not just what she wanted, but why she wanted it, with the clarity and conviction that had impressed every adult who had taken the time to really listen to her. As the courtroom emptied for the recess, Emily remained seated, reviewing her folder one last time. She thought about all the evening sessions with Catherine, all the careful documentation of her life with Margaret, all the questions she had learned to ask about fairness and justice, and what was truly best for a child. In a few minutes, she would have the opportunity to present her case to the person who would decide her future. Emily Bell, 7 years old, was about to become her own advocate in the most important conversation of her young life. The small girl with the serious brown eyes and the carefully organized folder was ready to speak truth to power, to show that sometimes the most important voices come in the smallest packages, and that understanding what matters most in life has nothing to do with age and everything to do with experience, honesty, and the courage to speak up for what is right. Judge Pemberton's chambers were smaller and warmer than the formal courtroom, with bookshelves lining the walls and family photographs on the desk that made the space feel more personal. Emily sat in a comfortable chair across from the judge, her folder balanced on her lap, her hands folded with the careful composure that had become second nature during her weeks of preparation with Catherine. "Emily," Judge Pemberton began, her voice gentler than it had been in the courtroom, "I want you to know that this conversation is just between us. No one else will hear what you say unless you want them to. I'm going to ask you some questions, but you can also tell me anything you think I should know. Do you understand?" Emily nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. Miss Lewis explained to me that this is my chance to help you understand my situation from my perspective." Judge Pemberton raised an eyebrow at the mature phrasing. Miss Lewis is your teacher, correct? She's been helping you prepare for today. Yes, but not in the way you might think, Emily replied carefully. She didn't tell me what to say or coach me to give specific answers. She taught me about children's rights and family law so I could understand what was happening and think about it clearly for myself. I see. And what have you learned? Emily opened her folder and referred to her notes not because she had forgotten, but because Catherine had taught her that organization and evidence were important in legal discussions. I learned that in custody cases, the most important thing is what's best for the child, not what's easiest for the adults or what looks good on paper. I learned that judges consider lots of different factors, like who has been taking care of the child, whether the child is healthy and happy, what the child's own wishes are, and whether there might be any harm from changing the current situation. Judge Pemberton was impressed by Emily's articulation, but she had seen children who had been coached before. Emily, these are important concepts, but I want to know what you think about your own situation. Can you tell me about your life with your mother? Emily's expression softened, and her voice took on a more natural, childlike tone as she moved from reciting legal concepts to describing her lived experience. Mummy and I have a good life together, she began. Every morning, she wakes me up by singing softly and sitting on my bed until I'm ready to get up. She knows I don't like loud noises when I first wake up. She makes my breakfast and cuts my toast into triangles, because I told her once that triangles taste better, and she remembered that. Emily paused, seeming to organize her thoughts. After school, we always have a snack together, and she asks me about my day, not just, did you have a good day? But real questions about what I learned and who I played with and if anything worried me. When I have problems, she helps me think about solutions instead of just telling me what to do. Dee, can you give me an example of that? Emily nodded. Last year, there was a girl in my class who was being mean to me and some other children. Instead of just telling me to ignore her or complaining to the teacher, Mummy helped me think about why the girl might be acting that way and what different approaches I could try. We practiced what I might say to her, and we talked about when it would be right to ask for help from adults. It worked. The girl and I became friends, and I learned how to handle conflicts better. Judge Pemberton made notes as Emily spoke, recognizing the signs of thoughtful parenting in the child's description. Tell me about your relationship with your father. Emily's expression grew more serious. I don't really have a relationship with my father. He left when I was 2, and I don't remember him living with us. Mummy has told me some things about him, and I've figured out other things by asking questions and thinking about the timing of events. What kinds of things have you figured out? Emily referred to her notes again. I know he left because he said being a father was too hard. I know he never sent birthday cards or Christmas presents or called to check on me when I was sick. I know he never paid child support to help Mummy take care of me. And I know he only filed for custody 2 weeks after my grandfather died and left me some money. Judge Pemberton felt a chill at Emily's matter-of-fact presentation of these facts. How do you feel about that timing? It makes me suspicious, Emily replied honestly. For 5 years, he showed no interest in being my father, but suddenly, right after I inherit money that the custodial parent would control, he wants me to live with him. That seems like more than a coincidence. Emily, that's a very serious accusation. Do you understand what you're suggesting? Emily met the judge's eyes steadily. I'm suggesting that his interest in me might be financial rather than paternal. I can't prove that definitively, but I can point to evidence that supports that conclusion. What evidence? Emily opened her folder and pulled out a timeline she had created. I researched his employment history through public records and social media. He got his current high-paying job 6 months ago. His lifestyle on social media shows significant improvement in the same time period. He learned about my inheritance from mutual acquaintances approximately 3 months ago. He filed for custody 2 weeks later. Judge Pemberton was startled by the thoroughness of Emily's research. "Emily, how did you learn to do this kind of analysis?" "Miss Lewis taught me about evidence and logical reasoning, but the conclusions are my own, based on the facts I could verify." "What do you want, Emily? If you could decide where to live, what would you choose?" Emily's voice became stronger, more confident. "I want to stay with my mummy, but not just because it's what I'm used to or because change is scary. I want to stay with her because she's been a good mother to me every single day of my life. She's worked hard to provide for me. She's taught me important values. She's supported my education and my friendships. And she's shown me what love looks like through actions, not just words. Your father's lawyers argue that he can provide opportunities your mother can't afford. What do you think about that?" Emily had clearly given this considerable thought. "I think opportunities are important, but I also think there are different kinds of opportunities. My father might be able to pay for expensive schools or activities, but my mummy has given me the opportunity to see what hard work and dedication look like. She's given me the opportunity to learn that love means putting someone else's needs first, even when it's difficult." Emily paused, then continued with remarkable insight for her age. "I'm already doing well in school. I have good friends. I'm healthy and happy. What more opportunities do I need than the ones I already have? And if my father truly cared about giving me opportunities, wouldn't he have been doing that for the past 5 years instead of waiting until now?" Judge Pemberton leaned back in her chair, studying Emily with genuine amazement. "Emily, you've clearly thought about this very carefully. Is there anything else you want me to know?" Emily nodded. "I want you to know that I understand this decision will affect my entire life, and I don't take that lightly. I've tried to think about this logically, not just emotionally. I've considered what my father's lawyers will argue, and I understand that he can offer material advantages that my mummy can't. But," Emily continued, her voice gaining strength, "I also understand that being a good parent means more than having money. It means being there every day, learning who your child really is, helping them grow into a good person, and loving them consistently even when it's hard or inconvenient." Emily met Judge Pemberton's eyes directly. "My mummy has done all of those things for 7 years. My father has done none of them. I don't think suddenly having money changes that, and I don't think it would be good for me to live with someone who sees me as a means to an end rather than as a person he loves." The room was quiet for a long moment. Finally, Judge Pemberton spoke. "Emily, I've been a family court judge for 15 years, and I've never heard a more articulate or thoughtful presentation from anyone, adult or child. You've clearly been well prepared, but more importantly, you've shown remarkable insight into your own situation." Emily smiled for the first time during the interview. "Thank you, Your Honor. Miss Lewis taught me that being prepared is important, but she also taught me that the most important thing is to tell the truth clearly. I hope I've done that." As Emily gathered her folder and prepared to return to the courtroom, Judge Pemberton felt certain that she had just heard one of the most compelling pieces of testimony in her judicial career. The little girl walking out of her chambers had demonstrated not only intelligence and preparation, but wisdom, emotional maturity, and a clear understanding of what truly mattered in human relationships. The question now was whether the law would recognize and protect the remarkable bond between mother and daughter that Emily had so eloquently described, or whether financial advantages would outweigh the deeper values that Emily understood so clearly. The courtroom felt different when Emily returned from Judge Pemberton's chambers. The afternoon light slanted through the high windows, casting long shadows across the proceedings, and there was a palpable tension in the air as everyone awaited the judge's decision. Emily took her seat beside Margaret, noting how her mother's hands trembled slightly as she folded them in her lap. Charles Whitmore studied his daughter with new interest, having learned from his lawyers that Emily had spent considerable time with the judge. His confident demeanor had shifted to something more uncertain and Emily noticed that he kept glancing at his legal team as if seeking reassurance. Judge Pemberton returned to the courtroom with a thick folder of notes and a grave expression that revealed nothing about her intentions. She settled at her desk and spent several minutes reviewing her papers before addressing the room. This case has required me to consider fundamental questions about the nature of parenthood, the meaning of a child's best interests, and the proper weight to give various factors in determining custody, she began. I have heard compelling arguments from both sides, and I have had the opportunity to speak extensively with Emily about her own perspective on this situation. Emily felt her heart racing, but forced herself to sit still and listen carefully. Mr. Whitmore, Judge Pemberton continued, your legal team has presented evidence of your improved financial circumstances and your stated desire to provide opportunities for Emily that her current situation cannot offer. There is no question that you have the means to provide material advantages, and the court recognizes that such advantages can benefit a child's development. Charles straightened in his chair, hope flickering across his face. However, the judge continued, the court must consider not only what a parent can provide, but what a parent has provided, and more importantly, what motivates a parent's interest in custody. Mr. Whitmore, your 5-year absence from Emily's life is not a minor factor that can be explained away by career development. During those 5 years, Emily experienced significant milestones, starting school, learning to read, developing friendships, facing childhood challenges, and you chose not to be present for any of them. Emily felt Margaret's hand find hers under the table, their fingers intertwining as they listened to the judge's careful analysis. The timing of your custody petition raises serious concerns. The court finds it troubling that your renewed interest in parenthood coincides so precisely with Emily's inheritance from her maternal grandfather. While you maintain that learning of the grandfather's death caused you to reflect on family relationships, the evidence suggests a pattern of interest that correlates more strongly with financial opportunity than with genuine paternal concern. Charles's face flushed, and Emily could see his lawyers exchanging worried glances. Judge Pemberton turned her attention to Margaret. Ms. Bell, the evidence clearly demonstrates that you have provided Emily with consistent, loving care throughout her life. You have met all of her physical, emotional, and educational needs despite significant financial constraints. Emily's academic achievement, emotional stability, and moral development all reflect excellent parenting. Margaret felt tears gathering in her eyes, but maintained her composure as the judge continued. More importantly, the court has observed that Emily has developed into an exceptional young person under your care. Her intelligence, her ethical reasoning, her emotional maturity, and her ability to articulate complex thoughts are remarkable. These qualities don't develop by accident. They are the result of careful, thoughtful parenting over many years. Judge Pemberton paused and looked directly at Emily. Emily, your testimony today was extraordinary. I have never encountered a 7-year-old with your level of insight into family dynamics, legal concepts, and ethical reasoning. Your ability to analyze your own situation objectively, to consider multiple perspectives, and to articulate your thoughts clearly demonstrates not only exceptional intelligence, but wisdom that belies your years. Emily felt a flush of pride, but also nervousness about what the judge might say next. Your understanding of the real issues in this case, the difference between material advantages and genuine care, the importance of consistency and presence in parenting, the suspicious timing of your father's sudden interest, shows a maturity that is both impressive and, frankly, moving. You have been your own best advocate today. Judge Pemberton returned her attention to the room as a whole. The court recognizes that Mr. Whitmore can offer material advantages that Ms. Bell cannot provide. However, Emily is already thriving academically, socially, and emotionally in her current situation. The question is not whether Mr. Whitmore could provide a different kind of life for Emily, but whether disrupting her current situation would serve her best interests. The judge's voice grew firmer. The court finds that it would not. Emily has a strong, stable relationship with her mother that has fostered her remarkable development. She has expressed, with exceptional clarity and reasoning, her desire to remain in her current situation. Most importantly, the evidence suggests that Mr. Whitmore's interest in custody is motivated primarily by financial considerations, rather than genuine concern for Emily's well-being. Charles started to rise, but his lawyer put a restraining hand on his arm. Therefore, Judge Pemberton concluded, the court finds that Emily's best interests are served by remaining in the primary custody of her mother, Margaret Bell. Mr. Whitmore's petition for custody is denied. The words hit the courtroom like a thunderclap. Emily felt a surge of relief so powerful that she momentarily felt dizzy. Margaret closed her eyes and took a shaky breath, while David Morrison smiled with surprised satisfaction. However, the judge continued, the court also recognizes that children benefit from having relationships with both parents when possible. Mr. Whitmore, if you are genuinely interested in developing a relationship with Emily, as opposed to gaining control of her inheritance, the court is willing to establish a supervised visitation schedule that would allow you to rebuild a connection with your daughter. Judge Pemberton looked directly at Charles. These visits would be supervised initially, and their continuation would depend on Emily's comfort level and her assessment of your genuine interest in her as a person rather than as a financial asset. The choice to pursue or decline these visits would ultimately be Emily's, given her demonstrated ability to make thoughtful decisions about her own well-being. Emily felt a complex mix of emotions at this unexpected development. She had won the main battle. She would stay with her mother, but now she faced the prospect of potentially developing a relationship with a father she barely knew and didn't entirely trust. Judge Pemberton stood, signaling the end of the proceedings. This court is adjourned. Emily, I hope you continue to use your remarkable voice to advocate for yourself and others. You have shown today that age is no barrier to wisdom, courage, or moral clarity. As people began to file out of the courtroom, Emily remained seated for a moment, processing what had just happened. She had not only won the case, but she had been acknowledged as a capable advocate for her own interests. Judge Pemberton had recognized her voice as legitimate and valuable, worthy of respect and consideration. Catherine Lewis approached their table, her eyes bright with tears and pride. Emily, what you did today was extraordinary. You spoke truth to power with grace and wisdom that many adults never achieve. Emily looked up at her mentor. I couldn't have done it without everything you taught me, Miss Lewis. You helped me understand that having a voice is only part of it. You also have to know how to use it effectively. Margaret pulled Emily into a fierce hug, holding her daughter close as the weight of the past months finally began to lift. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. You fought for us both today. Emily hugged her mother back, then looked across the courtroom to where Charles stood with his deflated legal team. He was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. Surprise, perhaps, or even a grudging respect. Mummy, Emily said quietly, I think I might want to try those supervised visits. Not because I trust him, but because I want to understand him. Maybe if I can figure out who he really is, I can decide if there's anything worth salvaging. Margaret looked at her daughter with amazement. Even in victory, Emily was thinking about fairness, about second chances, about the complexity of human relationships. That's your choice to make, sweetheart, Margaret replied, and I trust your judgment completely. As they gathered their belongings and prepared to leave the courthouse, Emily reflected on the day's events. She had entered the building as a 7-year-old girl fighting for her future. She was leaving as something more, a young person who had successfully advocated for herself, who had proven that wisdom and courage could overcome financial advantage. and who had shown that sometimes the most powerful voices come in the smallest packages. The little girl who had declared, "I am my mother's lawyer," had not only won her case, but had demonstrated that justice, when supported by truth and delivered with clarity, could still prevail in an imperfect world. The spring afternoon sun filled Catherine Lewis's classroom as she watched Emily help a younger student with a reading assignment. Emily's patient explanation of phonics rules demonstrated the same clarity and teaching ability that had impressed Judge Pemberton 6 months earlier, but now it was channeled into the everyday act of helping a fellow student succeed. The custody case had transformed Emily in ways both subtle and profound. She carried herself with new confidence, spoke up more readily in class discussions, and had become a natural leader among her peers. But perhaps most remarkably, she had maintained her essential childhood wonder and playfulness, proving that wisdom and innocence could coexist. "Miss Lewis," Emily said, approaching Catherine's desk after helping her classmate, "I've been thinking about something." Catherine looked up from her grading with the familiar anticipation that Emily's questions always brought. "What's on your mind?" "I've been going to those supervised visits with my father for 3 months now," Emily said, settling into the chair beside Catherine's desk that had become her unofficial thinking spot. "And I think I'm starting to understand him better." Catherine nodded encouragingly. The visits had been a source of some anxiety initially, but Emily had approached them with the same analytical mindset she brought to everything else, treating them as an opportunity to gather information rather than simply endure an obligation. "What have you learned?" Emily considered her words carefully. "I think he really was trying to use me to get to the inheritance money, but I also think he didn't really understand what that meant. About using a person, I mean. It's like he thought of me as a solution to his problems, rather than as a real person with my own thoughts and feelings." Catherine was struck by Emily's ability to find nuance, even in difficult situations. "How do you feel about that understanding?" "It makes me sad for both of us," Emily replied honestly. "Sad for me because it means he never really thought about who I am as a person. But also sad for him because it means he missed out on knowing me for 5 years because he was focused on the wrong things." Emily paused, then continued with the thoughtful tone that had become her trademark. "But here's the interesting part. Now that the court made it clear he can't control my inheritance, and now that he has to actually spend time with me instead of just thinking about me as a financial opportunity, I think he's starting to see me differently." Catherine leaned forward with interest. "How so?" "Last week, during our visit, he asked me about my favorite books instead of talking about how he could pay for better schools. And when I told him about the debate competition I won, he seemed genuinely proud, not like he was calculating how it might benefit him somehow." Emily smiled slightly. "I think maybe he's learning how to be interested in me as a person. It's probably too late for us to have a normal father-daughter relationship, but maybe we can have some kind of relationship that's honest and real." Catherine felt a familiar surge of admiration for Emily's emotional intelligence. "That sounds very mature, Emily. How does your mother feel about your relationship with your father evolving?" "Mummy says she trusts my judgment, which feels really good," Emily replied. "She also says that learning to forgive people who hurt us when they actually change, not just when they say they're sorry, is one of the hardest and most important things we can do as humans." Emily pulled out a notebook, much like the one she had used during their legal preparation sessions. "I've been keeping track of the visits, documenting how they go and how I feel about them. Miss Lewis, I want to show you something I wrote last week." She opened to a recent entry and read aloud, "Visit Note 12 with Charles. I'm trying to think of him as Charles instead of my father, because father implies a relationship we don't really have yet. Today he brought a chess set and asked if I wanted to learn. When I told him I already knew how to play because Mummy taught me, he looked surprised but pleased. We played 3 games, and he didn't let me win, which I appreciated. When I won the third game, he said I was clearly very intelligent, and it sounded like he meant it as a compliment about me as a person, not as a comment about something he could take credit for. Catherine smiled at Emily's careful analysis. "It sounds like you're both learning." "I think we are," Emily agreed. "And Miss Lewis, I've been thinking about something else too, about what I want to do when I grow up." "Oh, and what's that?" Emily's eyes brightened with enthusiasm. "I want to be a family lawyer, like you used to be, but I want to specialize in representing children in custody cases. I think maybe having been through this experience myself and understanding what it feels like to be the person everyone is making decisions about might help me be better at advocating for other children." Catherine felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Emily, I think you would be an extraordinary advocate for children. You already are in many ways." "Really? How do you mean?" Catherine gestured toward the corner of the classroom where Emily had been helping her classmate. "You naturally help others understand complex ideas. You listen carefully to what people are really saying versus what they claim to be saying. You ask the right questions, and you're not afraid to speak up when something isn't fair." Emily nodded thoughtfully. "Those are important skills for a lawyer, aren't they? They're essential skills for any advocate. But Emily, you have something else that's even more important. You understand that the law should serve people, not the other way around. That's wisdom that some lawyers never develop." The classroom door opened, and Margaret appeared, having finished her workday. She looked tired but content, her small alterations business having grown steadily since the positive publicity from the custody case. Several local families had sought her out specifically because they had heard about her story, wanting to support a single mother who had fought so courageously for her daughter. "How are my two favorite scholars today?" Margaret asked, settling into a student desk with the easy familiarity that had developed over months of after-school conversations. "Emily was just telling me about her career plans," Catherine said with a smile. Margaret looked at her daughter with interest. "More career plans? Last week you wanted to be a teacher like Miss Lewis, and the week before that, a judge like Judge Pemberton." Emily laughed, a sound that reminded both women that despite her remarkable maturity, she was still very much a 7-year-old girl. "I've been thinking about all the people who helped us during the court case, and I realized they all had something in common. They used their knowledge and skills to make sure the right thing happened. Maybe I could do any of those jobs, as long as I'm helping make things fair for people who need someone to speak up for them." Margaret reached over and smoothed Emily's hair. "I think that's a wonderful goal, sweetheart. Though you should also remember that you don't have to decide everything right now. You're allowed to just be 7 sometimes." "I know," Emily replied with a grin. "But it's fun to think about the future, especially now that I feel like I have some control over what it might look like." Catherine began packing up her materials for the day. "Speaking of the future, Emily, I have something I want to discuss with both of you." Emily and Margaret looked at her with curiosity. "I've been approached by the Manchester Family Court about developing a program to help children understand their rights and prepare for custody proceedings. They want to create educational materials and training sessions for children who find themselves in situations similar to yours, Emily." Emily's eyes widened with excitement. "That's a wonderful idea. Would you do it?" Catherine smiled. "I was hoping you might help me. Your insights about what was helpful during your preparation, what was frightening, what you wish you had known earlier, all of that could help other children facing similar situations." Emily sat up straighter, clearly energized by the possibility. "Could we create materials that explain legal concepts in ways children can understand, and maybe teach them how to organize their thoughts and present their own experiences clearly?" "Exactly what I was thinking," Catherine confirmed. "And perhaps we could also help parents and lawyers understand how to communicate with children about legal proceedings in ways that are honest but not overwhelming." Margaret felt a surge of pride, watching her daughter's enthusiasm for helping others. "Emily, what do you think about taking on a project like that?" Emily considered the question with her characteristic seriousness. "I think it's important. I was lucky because I had Miss Lewis to help me understand what was happening and prepare for it. But there are probably lots of children who have to go through custody cases without anyone explaining their rights or helping them organize their thoughts." She paused, then added with quiet determination, "If I can help other children feel less scared and more prepared, then maybe some good came from our difficult situation." Catherine felt a familiar thrill at Emily's instinctive understanding of how personal experience could be transformed into advocacy for others. Then it settled. "We'll start working on the program this summer." As they gathered their belongings and prepared to leave the classroom, Emily turned back to Catherine with one final thought. "Miss Lewis, do you remember that first day when you told me that sometimes the most powerful voices come in small packages?" Catherine nodded, remembering the uncertainty and hope of those early afternoon sessions. "I think you were right," Emily continued. "But I also think I understand now that it's not about being small or big. It's about being honest and brave and caring more about doing the right thing than about being comfortable." Emily paused at the classroom door, looking back at the space where she had learned so much about law and justice and her own capabilities. "I think maybe that's what real advocacy is, using whatever voice you have, whatever size it is, to speak up for people who need someone to care about what happens to them." As they walked out into the spring evening, the three of them formed an unlikely but powerful partnership. Catherine, the lawyer-turned-teacher who had rediscovered her passion for justice through mentoring a remarkable student. Margaret, the single mother who had proven that love and dedication could triumph over financial advantage. And Emily, the 7-year-old who had found her voice in a courtroom and was already planning to use it to help others find theirs. 6 months after declaring, "I am my mother's lawyer," Emily Bell had become something even more significant. A young advocate who understood that justice was not about age or credentials, but about courage, truth, and the willingness to speak up for what was right. Her voice, once raised in a Manchester courtroom to defend her own future, was already being raised again, this time to help ensure that other children would have the same opportunity to be heard, understood, and protected. The little lawyer had grown into something even more powerful, a young person committed to making sure that no child would ever have to face the legal system alone, uninformed, or voiceless. And in a world that too often dismissed the insights of the young, Emily Bell was proof that sometimes the most important truths come from those who are brave enough to speak them, regardless of their age or size. Her story had become more than a custody case victory. It had become a testament to the power of education, mentorship, and the unshakable belief that every person, no matter how young, deserves to have their voice heard and their rights protected. What an absolutely incredible journey we've just witnessed with Emily Bell. This remarkable 7-year-old girl didn't just win a custody battle. She showed us all what true courage and wisdom look like when a child refuses to be silenced. From her first declaration, "I am my mother's lawyer," to her brilliant testimony that left even experienced legal professionals speechless, Emily's story proves that age means nothing when you have truth on your side. The way she methodically built her case, analyzed evidence, and spoke with such clarity about love, sacrifice, and what really matters in a parent-child relationship is absolutely breathtaking. Her mentor, Catherine Lewis, and devoted mother Margaret created the perfect support system for Emily to find and use her voice in the most important fight of her young life. If Emily's story moved you as much as it moved us, please hit that like button and share this video with everyone you know, because stories like this need to be heard around the world. This tale of justice, determination, And the unbreakable bond between a mother and daughter deserves to inspire parents, children, teachers, and anyone who believes that doing the right thing is worth fighting for. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories that prove ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they refuse to give up. We're curious about our amazing global audience. What country are you watching from? Drop a comment and let us know where Emily's inspiring voice has reached.
Today,